How you write and portray your villains in a D&D game can be an essential part to enjoying that campaign and also getting other people to want to run your adventures as well. A villain should only be defeated by brute force alone. You should have options like stealth and politics, and even appealing to their better nature, maybe even having the option to find a way to convince that villain that what they're doing is wrong. One of the best ways to make a villain interesting, though, is to put a spin on them, to have something that is unexpected about their character, and that's what we're talking to Chris Perkins about today in this video on D&D Beyond.
As far as villains go, I got some great advice early on from an editor who told me that if you want to sell a DM on an adventure idea, you can do one of two things. One, you can take something that seems trite or overdone and put a unique spin on it that we haven't seen before. Or you can just give us a kick-ass map for a location. With regard to the first thing, as I was a young designer trying to break into the industry and get the attention of editors and DMs and get my adventures played, one of the things I picked up very quickly was this idea of the spin. And that is, you can take, an adventure doesn't always have to introduce something completely new. You don't have to have a new monster to excite players. You can take an existing monster and pair it with another monster to make it interesting. You could take an existing monster and just tweak it a little to make it interesting. For instance, there was an adventure it actually was bought for Dungeon Magazine, didn't appear in Dungeon Magazine because it was given to Dragon Magazine, its sister publication, as a promotion to promote Dungeon Magazine. It was called The Chasm Bridge. And in it, you're in the underground and you come to this toll bridge in the Underdark. And there's a wizard there with some ogre companions guarding the bridge. And you have to either talk your way past the wizard, fight your way past the wizard, or whatever. But the one thing that always struck me as interesting about the wizard was that he was crippled. That he had basically been crippled by a foe in the past, and that affected him. It also affects the way that he reacts to things. And I thought that was a really subtle addition. It's not just a wizard, it is a wizard who has suffered a grievous injury and is basically coping with that injury. That gave that villain more depth. In the Cradle of Madness adventure, I think it was in Dungeon 83, the villain that you're fighting is pregnant. And what does that do to sort of the complexion of the villain and how you deal with that? It's a kind of a sophisticated conundrum for a lot of D&D players to wrestle with. But yeah, and then I also talked about villainous pairings. Often you can enhance a good villain, make it stronger by giving it somebody or some other creature to play off of. An idea that I thought about turning into an adventure at one point and never did was an adventure where the villain is a black dragon, but it has a will-o'-the-wisp whispering in its ear. And I thought that's kind of interesting, that essentially this dead spirit of the swamp is guiding the dragon in its missions and giving it directives and sort of like the power behind the dragon's throne and using it to work all sorts of mischief. It's a combination that I hadn't ever seen before, that these two monsters would be in cahoots. One of my favorite exercises as a designer is to sit down with the monster manual and pick out a monster that has interesting motivations or some hook that I think might make an interesting adventure, and then look through the monster manual to see what else in there could it be with. And not just, a goblin boss with goblin toadies, but maybe a goblin boss with a sentient flying sword, or a goblin boss with a awakened rhinoceros. Never seen that before. That could be awesome. If it's an awakened rhinoceros, it means it could talk to the goblin and actually, they could have some sort of camaraderie. Or the goblin is using the rhinoceros to basically bully other goblins into making him chief. I think that it's a quick and dirty way to come up with things that players have never seen before.
Thank you, Chris Perkins, for being on the show. D&D Beyond is the official digital tool set for 5th edition D&D. I'm Todd Kenrick. Thank you for watching.